From the San Francisco Public Press, you're listening to Civic. San Francisco's immigrant communities are facing a crisis as the Trump administration threatens mass deportations.
My parents are both immigrants. I'm very scared of them getting deported back to Mexico because I don't want them to go.
For 4 decades, San Francisco has been a refuge for immigrants seeking a better life and a battleground for justice when federal policies target vulnerable communities. Today, legal aid networks, rapid response teams, and mass protests are showing that the city will not stand by while so many of its residents are at risk.
We don't deserve to live in fear. We don't deserve to be disrespected and dehumanized.
In this episode, we'll hear from people affected by mass deportation efforts. We'll also hear from experts with a historical perspective and resistant movement organizers. I'm Sylvie Sturm, and this is Civic. I remember the tightness in my chest when I realized I might have made a mistake on my tax returns. It was a minor detail, something that likely wouldn't even raise a flag, but in that moment, panic set in. What if this small oversight put my residency status at risk? What if by some bureaucratic twist of fate, I faced deportation? It wasn't a completely absurd thought. Filing an invalid tax return is a deportable offense. But the truth is, as a Canadian immigrant, I had every privilege on my side. By pure luck, I was born in a country that appeals to U.S. immigration officials, one seen as safe, democratic, and prosperous. It was pretty easy to talk myself down. But for many immigrants whose twist of fate made them Central American, fear and anxiety are part of daily life. That's especially true today with President Donald Trump in his second term in office. He's vowing to crack down hard on immigrants by conducting mass deportations of potentially more than 10 million people. The threat is causing tremendous anxiety in San Francisco's immigrant communities, and thousands are taking to the streets to express their outrage.
We don't deserve to live in fear. We don't deserve to be disrespected and dehumanized every time the president opens his mouth.
I spoke to 17-year-old Jasmine during a march through the Mission in January. She was with her mother.
My parents are both immigrants, and I'm very scared of one day of them getting deported back to Mexico. It makes me really sad because I don't want them to go. I try not to think about it most of the day, but it always comes up on my social media, and I can't get my mind off of it.
Sisters Genesis, Daisy, and Dulce joined a march in February that spanned 20 miles from San Mateo through San Bruno, Daly City, and San Francisco. What does your sign say?
My parents fought for my future, now I will fight for theirs. My parents came at a young age, they're undocumented. They've been here for really long, most of their life, and yet they still don't have any rights at all. They work 9-to-5 jobs, construction, nanny, do anything any American does in this world.
I feel sad and I feel mad, honestly, because my parents pay taxes. My parents do everything that any American does. They're not criminals like President says. They're literally just regular human beings, and they're literally doing the same thing that all of us are doing. They came to find a better life than what they were living in Guatemala, and well, their love sprouted here, and here we are as 3 sisters fighting for their rights. They actually have to sacrifice the life they had over there. They also left their parents over there. I mean, my mom hasn't seen her mom for more than 20 years. So she left when she was 17. My grandma's already around in her 70s, and she hasn't seen her. So they don't realize that the people that are here trying to find a different, sort of living are sacrificing a lot. And they don't get the same rights that any American has. And it's not fair for them.
It's been a lot of tears ever since the elections and stuff like that. And it just shows it's the fact that you can't do much, but little things like this help a lot in making a difference. Our voices being heard around social media, and it motivates other people to make protests like this too.
National security has been Trump's go-to argument to justify mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. As a candidate, he promised that mass arrests and expulsions would target criminals, quote, the worst of the worst. But that's not how ICE arrests are playing out. A high percentage of people without criminal records are now being detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In Biden's last year, only a quarter of ICE arrests involved people without criminal records. Under Trump, that figure has gone up to 41% as of February 14th, according to reports of ICE data. And many people with criminal records had minor offenses, including, for example, traffic violations.
That's what he said that he was going for, people with criminal records. But at the end of the day, they're just grabbing people that are just of color. And they just think we're all criminals. But at the end of the day, we're not. Literally, we're not. We're just walking, trying to work.
ICE crackdowns in communities in California and across the country have caused widespread anxiety and hypervigilance for the presence of agents. During the protest in January, Mission District community organizer Roberto Hernandez explained how it has been affecting residents.
Fear. There's a lot of people who are scared. Couple times already I've gotten calls saying, hey, ICE is down on Valencia Street this week. It wasn't true. Somebody put up false, I've gotten hundreds of calls from people saying that, I bought my house and are they going to take my house away? Sending children to school. I mean, I've had parents have called me, I don't want to send my kid to school because I don't want them to get... I said, don't. Our schools are a safe place. They can't go in there, right? Well, what if I get picked up and the kids are in school? Who's going to,
Family separation is a constant looming threat for undocumented immigrants. Its apex came during the last Trump administration with horrific accounts of children and babies being taken from their parents at the border and placed in cold detention cells. A practice that the American Academy of Pediatrics said can cause children, quote, irreparable harm. ProPublica obtained audio from inside a U.S. Customs and Border Protection facility in which children can be heard wailing as an agent jokes, well, we have an orchestra here. Just a warning, this audio is disturbing.
Bueno, aquí tenemos una orquesta.
Tom Homan, who is a key policy proponent for family separation, is Trump's new border czar. He now seems to want to expand the policy beyond the border. Here he is talking to Caitlin Collins on CNN.
What does it take? What is the standard, I guess, to go into an elementary school?
If they are a public safety threat, national security threat, they should be chilled. They should be afraid because we're looking for them.
Well, if their parent is here and they're an undocumented immigrant.
They're not off the table either. I mean, if they're in the country illegally, they got a problem. I mean, it's not okay. Look, it's not okay to enter this country illegally. It's a crime. And that's the way it's supposed to be. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm in Switzerland illegally. So we won't enforce laws in this country. So, the schools and the churches and the central location was a policy only for ICE, only for immigration, right? But national security threats and public safety threats have no safe haven in this country, and we'll go where we got to go.
Just to be clear, living in the U.S. without documentation is rarely considered a serious crime. That's because most undocumented immigrants are visa overstayers, meaning they committed a civil violation, not a criminal one. And entry without a visa is a misdemeanor. If a person is deported and enters illegally again, then it becomes a felony.
It's inhumane. You've been here, you planted seeds because you came to live the American dream, and now the American dream is becoming the American nightmare. The U.S. has invested trillions of dollars in destabilizing a lot of the countries in Latin America. And so people have fled and came here thinking that they could have a better life. And you've been here 30 years and you've made a better life for yourself. And all of a sudden you have this threat that you will be deported.
San Francisco has 43,000 undocumented immigrants, according to 2019 estimates by the Migration Policy Institute. That's 5% of the city's entire population. And nearly 40% of them are from Central America. For those who escape the region's most impoverished and dangerous areas, deportation isn't just a bureaucratic nightmare. It's a forced return to a place where survival is uncertain. Ashley was on the 20-mile march in February.
Both of my parents are immigrants from Guatemala, and so I am standing up for them since they are living in fear. They were fighting poverty. I have visited where they are from. I got to see it firsthand. I realized that if they had stayed there with us, we would be very, very poor, and I'm just very proud of them for crossing borders, and now we have this opportunity, and I'm doing everything I can to fight for them as well.
Many undocumented immigrants risk their lives to make the harrowing journey to the U.S. with their children in tow. They do it to escape the violence and extreme poverty brought on by generations of corrupt regimes and weakened institutions. And the U.S. holds a large part of the blame. Throughout Central America, American-backed conflicts in the mid to late 20th century fueled political corruption, military crackdowns, and deep social divisions, leading to a huge exodus of the population. In Nicaragua, American intervention goes as far back as 1910, when the United States Navy and Marines helped to overthrow a president seen as unfriendly to U.S. interests. Then from the 1930s to the 70s, the U.S. propped up the Somoza dictatorship, backing him during the notorious conflict when the Sandinistas tried to take power. Dan Kovalik, author of Nicaragua, A History of U.S. Intervention and Resistance, talked to Mitch Jeserek, host of Letters and Politics on KPFA.
And Franklin Roosevelt, of course, one of our better presidents himself, would say that Somoza was a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch, that famous statement, you know. These were very difficult years for the Nicaraguan people because Somoza did nothing to develop the country in terms of roads or hospitals or all the resources he got, he used for himself and his buddies. And, of course, the rest went to American business interests.
The U.S. held a proxy war against a leftist rebellion, training the right-wing Contra force and bringing in neighboring countries into the conflict.
They wanted to be democratic and they wanted to be decent and abide by human rights conventions. But again, the U.S. used it against them and was able to organize the National Guardsmen and the Contras, which again would terrorize Nicaragua. They were formed in Honduras. And that was their staging ground throughout the war. Again, there was a smaller Contra group in Costa Rica, but it was not significant. It was mostly based in Honduras.
I mean, it is interesting to think today about that history between the United States and Honduras, for even relations today with the United States and Honduras, that it was a launching ground for the Contras.
Yes, and it very much distorted Honduras itself and distorted its political system. The U.S. had built a huge base there in Honduras. I believe the biggest base it has in the hemisphere outside the United States. I believe that's still true. So it really militarized Honduras. Again, the U.S. supported a dictatorship there to allow it to conduct its military activities.
Today, more than 60% of the Honduran population lives in poverty. Remittances from Hondurans living abroad make up more than a quarter of the country's GDP. Honduras also has the second highest homicide rate among nations in Latin America and the Caribbean. Extortion is widespread, and citizens are routinely killed for refusing to pay money to street gangs like MS-13. By the way, that notorious MS-13 criminal enterprise is not originally from Central America, as Trump and his officials keep suggesting. MS-13 was actually born in the U.S. and exported south. The seeds were planted in 1980 as a decade-long American-backed civil war in El Salvador left over 75,000 dead. It caused a huge flight of Salvadorans to the U.S. A decade later, the federal government launched a massive deportation effort. Among the deported were young men from Los Angeles, where two gangs, MS-13 and Barrio 18, were formed, then mixed with California prison gang culture. The gangs thrived in El Salvador, where post-war instability allowed it to grow into a powerful crime syndicate. Today, MS-13 and Barrio 18 control entire neighborhoods, extorting businesses and recruiting members through violence and mayhem, once again forcing people to flee the country. But traumatized Central Americans have always faced an American immigration system that's primarily concerned with legal status, not the reasons behind their migration. Mariela Topete is a union and community organizer in San Francisco. Her mother and family members were among the millions of people who left Central America in the 1980s and following decades, many of them forced to flee.
What they were facing in their country was so scary and the desperation was so real that I don't think people understand that it's really about, it's a hard decision to leave. My family was separated for many years because it took a long time for one daughter, then the next daughter, then a son. The last son didn't make it here. They started moving here in the 70s, and my uncle didn't actually get here till 1985. So it was decades of like little by little trying to get everybody here and together. But I don't think I think they just see it as like, well, you just want to come here to live off, whatever the United States is offering you. No, they came here to work and they came here to build their families. Again, they had everything. They had their home in Nicaragua. They had to leave it all. It was destroyed. My mother was now 74 now, and she cares for my daughter, who's about to be 9. She's still very active, but she came here and she put her daughters through school. She's helping me with my daughter. She worked in a bank down in the financial district for over 30 years. So she really did, as a single mom, put everything she could into having us succeed. And, I tell my daughter that, when we hear these negative messages of immigrants and aliens and just otherizing us, it's like, Grandma, your grandma is an immigrant. And we don't see her like this, just like everyone else they're talking about. Not everybody's here to commit crimes or do awful things. She became a naturalized citizen. And, to hear my daughter asking Grandma, are you sure, Grandma, that you're okay? You have the right documents, right? They're not going to take you from me. It breaks my heart to hear it because my mom can turn to her and say, yes, honey, I'm okay. Yes, I have the right documents, but we know not everybody does. And so children her age are hearing these things, whether we want to protect them from the news or not. They hear the words of like illegals, aliens, just all the language to cause division and to otherize us.
In the 1980s, the Reagan administration refused to recognize refugees fleeing U.S.-backed wars as asylum seekers. So, San Francisco and dozens of other cities began adopting policies aimed at providing sanctuary for traumatized Central Americans. The protections built on San Francisco's long history of protecting marginalized communities going back to the Fugitive Slave Act. In 1858, when Archie Lee was arrested in San Francisco after escaping slavery, the local black community and white abolitionists fought for his release. A California judge ruled in Lee's favor, setting a precedent for others who were fighting attempts to enforce bondage in free states. And a case fought in San Francisco in 1898 remains one of the most important decisions in U.S. immigration and constitutional law. In 1895, after visiting China, Wong Kim Ark was denied re-entry despite having been born in the U.S. Immigration officials argued that, as the son of Chinese parents, he was not a U.S. citizen due to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. He won a challenge to his exclusion in a San Francisco federal court, arguing that the 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States. That's still used today to protect birthright citizenship against legal and political challenges, like those recently advanced by Trump. In October of 1985, nearly 40 years ago, San Francisco adopted its first official sanctuary policy with the passage of the City of Refuge Ordinance. It barred local law enforcement from cooperating with immigrant officials unless required by law. The main goal was to block immigration officials from checking jail bookings for residency status and questioning anybody at will. But the law was tested in 1989 when San Francisco police joined immigration officials in a joint raid on Club Elegante in the Mission District. Dozens of people were handcuffed and detained for hours, including many American citizens. As one assemblyman said, that incident created a public backlash that ignited a sleeping giant in the city. Officials then passed an amended sanctuary ordinance to explicitly prohibit city employees, including police, from collaborating with federal immigration enforcement, except when required by law. The idea was that it would build trust and cooperation in the immigrant community. And that's still the argument that law enforcement and city officials put forward today. In a rare display of unity, San Francisco's top prosecutor, police chief, and public defender gathered on the steps of City Hall in January to reaffirm the city's commitment to sanctuary laws. Here's District Attorney Brooke Jenkins.
I stand here as a partner in making sure that our immigrant communities know that San Francisco's leadership stands with them. As the daughter of a father who is from El Salvador, who I didn't get to be raised with in part because he was not a citizen here, I fully know what it feels like to have your family separated based on where you are a citizen of. And so when I do my work each and every day, it's to make sure not only that we keep immigrant communities safe from crime, but that we also ensure that our immigrants here in the city of San Francisco feel safe enough to report the crimes that are happening to them.
San Francisco has been steadfast despite federal attempts to punish and undermine its sanctuary city laws. In January 2017, Trump issued an executive order to withhold federal funds from sanctuary jurisdictions. The city filed a lawsuit arguing that the order violated the 10th Amendment and the separation of powers doctrine. Federal courts sided with San Francisco, declaring the executive order unconstitutional and issuing a permanent nationwide injunction against its enforcement. In February this year, new executive orders again threatened to cut federal funding to sanctuary cities. San Francisco is now leading a coalition of cities and counties in a lawsuit alleging that these federal actions violate several aspects of the Constitution. City Attorney David Chu expressed pride in the city's fight to preserve sanctuary policies during a rally in the Mission in January.
San Francisco is a proud sanctuary city. 8 years ago, Donald Trump came for San Francisco, attacked us for being a sanctuary city, and I'm proud that the San Francisco City Attorney's Office defended our rights as San Franciscans, and we will do it again. He said what we were doing was illegal. It is not. I tell you that as your city attorney, because no human being is illegal. Being a sanctuary city is about saying, Donald Trump, it is your job to enforce whatever you're going to do about federal immigration laws, but it is our job to keep our communities safe. And we are safer when law enforcement and our immigrant communities can work together. We are safer when immigrant victims of crime and witnesses of crime know that they can trust law enforcement to work with us to keep us safe. And let me tell you, as your city attorney, I will do whatever within our power to stand up for our immigrant communities.
Grassroots organizations and legal advocates are working together to provide protection and resources that teach immigrants how to respond if approached by ICE agents. Larissa Dugan-Quadra is executive director of the Central American Resource Center, SF. During a rally in January, she called on protesters to memorize their rights.
To migrate is to affirm our right to life. Migration is a right. Woo! So what we're going to do is, voy a hablar en español, and you all are going to translate. Un pueblo informado es un pueblo preparado. An informed community is a prepared community. So we all have rights in this country despite what they might want to say. Tenemos el derecho a no abrir la puerta. Derecho a mantenerse en silencio. Stay silent. Derecho a hacer una llamada telefónica. Right to make a phone call. Derecho a tener audiencia ante un juez. Right to justice and due process. Derecho a que se le respete su integridad física. The right to no harm. Derecho a no firmar documentos. The right to not sign documents. Derecho a evaluar si usted califica para algún proceso migratorio. The right to seek a legal consultation to determine if you qualify for some program. So remember, in this country we all have rights. Recordemos que en este país todas y todos tenemos derechos.
Dugan Quadra told me the Know Your Rights campaign helps to minimize the fear and damage caused by looming ICE raids.
We've definitely seen the impacts of sweeping enforcement on communities. We've seen the harm that it causes, not just the impact to individuals and families, but communities overall. Small businesses, family daycares, senior care, all the sectors that migrants impact are also impacted when there's sweeping enforcement. So we have seen that in the past. I think what makes this moment different is that there's a very public, overt, xenophobic discourse connected to it. And you have like the president of the United States talking about immigration like every other minute, just completely dehumanizing people who migrate. No regard for children and families, no regard for the impacts on communities. We've seen business owners be really upset because they're like, this is hurting my pocket. We've seen the evangelical church say, we supported you, but we don't support this, because now their congregations are empty because their members are afraid to go to their place of worship. The damage is done regardless because of the psychological and trauma factor of people being forced back into the shadows, people living in fear, people not accessing life-saving healthcare or other services because of fear of deportation. That's a tragedy. And it's really a moral imperative for us to combat these criminalizing narratives and to lift the truth, which is the measurable, unequivocal, statistically empirical contributions that migrants make to the economy, the culture, the civic and social fabric of our cities and the nation.
She said that the campaign is working.
Maybe one thing that's very different this time is that community knows that we're the only ones that are going to save ourselves in the sense of upholding our rights.
For Trump's border czar, educating people on their rights equates to breaking the law.
They call it know your rights. I call it how to escape arrest. There's a warrant for your arrest, and they tell you how to hide from ICE. No, don't open your door. Don't answer questions. Okay, you can call it know your rights all you want, but there's an order for their removal. They've been ordered removed by a federal judge after due process at great taxpayer expense. They need to go. But if we got to play that cat and mouse game, that's what we're going to do till every one of them gone.
A point of clarification here. Civil rights advocates tell immigrants that arrest warrants signed by judges do allow agents legitimate entry into their homes. It's when agents have no paperwork or a document that the ICE agent himself signed, yes, that's a thing, that they can refuse entry and refuse to answer questions. Ron Hayduck is a political science professor at San Francisco State University with an expertise in immigration, voting, inequality, and social movements. He made a distinction between deportations under President Barack Obama and Trump's efforts.
Obama deported more than 3 million people over 8 years, but the Trump administration has said, we're going to do more in 4 years. They've committed to use a whole array of agencies and resources that were not part of what Obama did, between 2009 and 2016. The other piece of it is, it's true that Obama, who was dubbed by many immigrant rights organizations as the deporter in chief, did deport more people than all the previous presidents into his time. But he also was someone who kind of championed, pathways to citizenship and was the author of DACA at the prompting of immigrant rights organizations and the Dreamers.
Hayduck said the rights that protect California's immigrants today exist because people across the state organized and took to the streets.
And these kinds of questions about who belongs or, what is this American project all about? And, there's clearly two different sort of views of this, this sort of idea that the United States is a white Christian republic versus a multiracial egalitarian democracy. I mean, the state of California, 1990, California wasn't such a hospitable place to immigrants. We had Governor Pete Wilson, and a number of other officials who promoted really very severe anti-immigrant laws and policies, Proposition 187 in 1994, which would have barred immigrants from public services and many of the things that the Trump administration is kind of doing now, without being able to detain and deport people, but basically make it illegal for folks to be here or to receive lots of benefits and services and get people to self-deport. And, California now is one of the most pro-immigrant states in terms of policy in the whole nation. And that was partly because of the response by immigrants and labor unions and other civic groups and civil rights organizations that really push back. And I think we're seeing, some of those same sort of dynamics in the recent period. The massive 2006 immigrant rights marches that, 5 million people marched across the country in several months was significant here in California, but it was 100 cities across the country that were involved in this. And whole generations of people were sort of forged in that moment. The dreamers, and some of the immigrant rights activists that helped push forward policies at the state and local level that granted a whole host of rights and benefits to immigrants, from driver's licenses to language access to education, health benefits, housing, a whole host of rights and benefits that people get here in California that were not the law of the land here in the 1990s, let alone, in many other states.
San Francisco's sanctuary policies are especially vulnerable when high-profile crimes involving violence or drugs get national attention. But advocates say the policies are often scapegoated when other factors, including federal law enforcement, share part of the blame. Sanctuary policies have most recently come under fire as Central Americans appear prominently in street-level drug sales while an overdose crisis plagues the city. Board of Supervisors President Rafael Mandelman has been a sanctuary advocate, but he's endorsed deportation for convicted drug dealers. And a few years ago, Supervisor Matt Dorsey, who's in addiction recovery, proposed legislation that would add selling fentanyl as an exception to sanctuary protections, along with violent felonies like murder, rape, and kidnapping. That proposal didn't pass, but the district attorney's office may be doing the next best thing. San Francisco Public Defender's Assistant Chief Attorney, Angela Chan, helped draft state and local sanctuary laws. She said the district attorney and police are skirting sanctuary policies by referring drug cases to federal prosecutors. Chan said several defendants have appeared in court only to have local drug-related charges dismissed by state prosecutors and refiled by federal prosecutors in federal court. She said coercive plea deals give defendants a choice between lengthening prison sentences and deportation, followed by a swift transfer to ICE detention and removal. And that does not give those accused of crimes enough time to prepare an adequate defense, like providing proof that they were driven to sell drugs through threats to themselves and their families. Labor trafficking has been argued as a defense in 7 San Francisco drug sale trials from 2022 to 2024, resulting in 2 guilty verdicts, 4 hung juries, and the acquittal of a 27-year-old Honduran. That man was living in poverty with his family 10 years earlier when he was approached by someone promising well-paying construction jobs in the United States. Once here, the cartel moved him to different cities while threatening to harm his family over $10,000 it said he owed for being escorted over the border. He took legitimate jobs, but was threatened for paying down his debt too slowly. After he was acquitted in September, the man recorded a message for the judge and jury.
Y le quiero dar las gracias a todos los que están presentes y por enseñarme, darme su apoyo.
He says, I want to thank everyone who is here and for teaching me and giving me their support. But first, I want to thank the judge for listening to my story and allowing me to testify. I also want to wholeheartedly thank the members of the jury who listened to what I had to say. They heard me when I asked them for help, and they helped me. Thank you. I hope that after today, the San Francisco District Attorney listens to my plea and signs the papers so I can obtain a visa, finally be free, and have a way to work, live freely, and fulfill my dream of helping my family. District Attorney Jenkins has rejected the labor trafficking defense in local drug sales cases, saying these defendants have more autonomy than victims of sex or other labor trafficking since they're allowed to travel freely while having access to phones and cars. The district attorney's office denied that deportation orders played a part in plea deals in a statement emailed to the public press. The email stated that Chan is conflating ICE with normal federal investigations, and that the DA's office works with the federal government in the prosecution of drug dealers. Debates like these that focus on arrests and prosecutions obscure studies that show undocumented immigrants are 45% less likely to be convicted of crimes than native-born Americans. And violent crime rates are particularly lower among undocumented immigrants. A study of all 50 states from 1990 to 2014 found that an increase in undocumented immigration was actually associated with a decrease in violent crime. They're also significant financial contributors to the country. In 2018, the U.S. had more than 800,000 undocumented entrepreneurs, generating total business income of $15.2 billion. And the estimated spending power of undocumented immigrants is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And they contribute over $11 billion annually in state and local taxes. Meanwhile, proportionally, they're less of a drain on public services than U.S. citizens since they can't collect Social Security, Medicare, or most other welfare programs. Although some states, including California, do provide limited health, food, and cash assistance. But Trump's rhetoric has pushed a different narrative.
Trump is saying things like, immigrants are born criminals, essentially they're poisoning the blood, and to the extent that, the MAGA movement is really connected to really retrograde right-wing groups, very white supremacist, nativist militias, that have not only threatened violence, but used violence. We've seen the rise of, hate and attacks on people that these kinds of messages sent by the highest levels of our government can foment. So I think that's a big difference too, and not to be underestimated in terms of its impact or potential impacts. We haven't seen those manifest so much yet, but I can't imagine that's not forthcoming.
Hayduck says he's still holding out hope that public pressure will succeed in pushing back against hate.
I guess I am actually kind of optimistic in the sense that a lot of groups are really thinking much more concertedly. And I think there's a set of organizations nationally that are talking about actions. Like there's a national action on April the 17th around higher education. There's a national set of actions happening in May around immigrants and immigrant rights, starting on May Day, but going to Cinco de Mayo. And so I know that there, aside from the lawsuits, that there's going to be much more concerted action on the ground in communities and across the country. And in the past, that's what's really worked. And so I'm hopeful that those efforts will continue. I'll do my best to participate and make that happen. But I think that's where, we as a society and species can hope to move towards, because the alternative is quite barbaric.
I'm Sylvie Sturm, and you've been listening to Civic. Civic comes to you from KSFP LP 102.5 FM in San Francisco, a project of the San Francisco Public Press, a nonprofit investigative newsroom. Find the accompanying article for this episode and all our reporting at sfpublicpress.org. Our theme music is by John Dillon. Additional music was supplied by the Blue Dot Sessions. Our team includes KSFP Program Director Mel Baker and Executive Director Lila LaHood. Find everything going on with Civic and the San Francisco Public Press by signing up for our newsletter at sfpublicpress.org/newsletter. Thanks for listening.